did you move? She looks so
I went up and I kept fearing that my yarmulke was going to fall off, so I took it off. I said, I don't want to stress it out. That's 60 days to kill. Like this is really right. Hello. Oh, wow.
A lot of family here.
Yeah.
It's awesome. There's still a lot of people waiting, so you can just pick Fontana's picking these. We're gonna hand them out. People come in.
It just got hot off the press?
Hot off the
How about
press.
that?
Exactly.
How nice is this?
Okay. Um. All right. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Okay. Okay.
It,
Super.
yeah, I
Okay.
didn't want
I'll
it. It was
celebrate
originally here in
them.
the middle. I moved it to the side a little bit.
Okay. All right.
So that, well, people, if you.
Bring out your first?
Just practicing.
Are you practicing?
I'm so excited to hear you. I heard you were coming. You did? Where'd you hear that from? Do you think we should sit? Yeah, I'm gonna sit somewhere. When you want to sit? Here, let's go sit over there.
Say hi to the Bennons.
Can't wait.
Where are they? They're there.
Where's Haley?
They do. They just leave. She's in the middle of the basketball game.
Practice now.
I'm not. I'm not. I didn't know you were serious.
Looking good, man. Real good. Yeah, good.
What's that?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
How are you? Good
Max,
luck.
how you doing?
Good.
Hey, what's up, sir?
Save the best for last.
Oh, that was so much fun. You guys were so good.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. Welcome, welcome everyone. There's so much excitement in this room. So if everyone can find a seat that they like. I think the microphone is working. Well, wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming for this really special event. This is our first annual KI. Yes. First of many. Our first annual storytelling event, Legacy, Stories for the Generations. Our storytellers are sitting in the front row, and for each of these storytellers, the theme of legacy brought to mind something unique and profound to share with all of you, their KI community. As you listen, you may be thinking about what legacy means to you, both what you have received and what you may be passing on. I started thinking about it, and I thought my family heirloom is longevity. I got to know all of my grandparents and 3 great-grandparents. I knew my great-grandfather Zeta, my mother's grandfather, for 6 years. And he used to show up unannounced at our front door, having taken the bus from his Fairfax apartment to the Palisades and then walking from the bus stop, and he would appear bearing juicy fruit gum for my sister and me. It was the most exciting gift you could get. It had sugar. He would come in, he would sit down in the living room, he would put on the WWF wrestling, and he insisted that it was all real. And my dad would sit down. He said, it's not real. He'd argue with him. He said, yes, it is. He said, if it's real, tell me one rule. Tell me one thing you can't do to the other guy. And my great-grandfather would smile, but he would not answer. Once he gave me a velvet purple bag. I cherished it. I didn't know what Chivas Regal was, but I loved its texture. I loved the smell of Zeta's cigars, and I used that bag to hold my marble collection for many years. Like me, my children have known 3 of their great-grandparents, Mary, Jack, and still Lily. They almost knew a 4th. Our first child, Aaron, was born 1 year after my grandfather Al died, and there was some magical thinking part of me that wondered if maybe Al might make an appearance in the next generation. I looked for him. I would see a certain gesture in one of my boys, and I'd think, there he is. And when Emmett took up mixed martial arts last year, I thought, there's Al's boxing and Zeta's wrestling. So we look for our parents' and our grandparents' traits in our children. We say, he has Joyce's eyes, Fran's intellect, Peter's curiosity, Roger's intensity and humor. We long to connect the generations, to believe that what came before will last into the future after the tangible evidence of our living is over. But what if we don't get to know our grandparents or our great-grandparents in life? My husband's grandfathers died when he was a baby. But he knows them, and his children and I know them, and his grandmothers through the stories told about them. Stanley, the synagogue president with the heart of a poet. Sarah, the first-grade teacher, doting grandmother, who picked my husband up from Hebrew school and took him to the toy store, and then McDonald's for the quarter pounder with cheese. And there was Aaron, the country doctor and adored patriarch, who once rode his niece's boyfriend's new motorcycle into the swimming pool during the pool party. And Selma, the artist and the inspirer who made every visit magical for all of her grandchildren. Through stories, our most precious family heirloom, we know them. Their quirks, their passions, their foibles, their values, their legacy. Through our stories, we bridge the generations, and not just 3 or 4, but 1,000. The tapestry of Jewish life is woven from stories, from the beginning and continuing through today, right now. Welcome to Legacy.
The coldest night of my life. It was 1989. I was 24 years old. I had just graduated from law school and had taken the California bar exam. I bought a plane ticket to Norway, a Euro pass, a hostel card, and a lightweight backpack. I had 60 days to kill before starting work in an LA law firm. I was as free as a bird. I had no set itinerary, no obligations, no responsibilities. I was off the grid and unreachable. I made my way through Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, then to Holland, Brussels, Germany, and France, moving from city to city based on the recommendations of fellow travelers. The plan was to see Scandinavia and Northern Europe before visiting the Middle East, Egypt, and Israel, and then the lands of my Sephardic ancestors, Greece and Turkey. I flew from Paris to Cairo, where I rode a camel, saw the pyramids and the Sphinx, and boated on the Nile. From Cairo, I traveled by bus across the Sinai Peninsula to the Promised Land, first stopping at Mount Sinai, where Moses spoke with God and received the Ten Commandments. This is where the coldest night of my life began. At a monastery at the base of Mount Sinai, I paid a few dollars for a bottle of water and another few dollars to leave my backpack. Then I began my trek up the mountain on a hot summer day, just like Moses did 3,000 years ago. Along the way, I met some Canadians. They could have been Canaanites. And they let me know that the true adventurers stay overnight at the top of Mount Sinai in order to catch an incredible sunset at nightfall, as well as the most awe-inspiring sunrise at daybreak. I accepted their invitation. However, the Canadians were prepared and had cold weather gear and sleeping bags. I, on the other hand, was ill-equipped. I was a summer backpacker. I was not prepared to sleep on the ground on the top of a mountain. I had nothing more than a sweatshirt and a thin rain poncho to keep me warm. The hike up the 4,000 steps carved into the side of the mountain was an adventure. At the top, I met a dozen other travelers from around the world who also chose to camp out that night. The sunset over the neighboring mountains to the west was spectacular, with the granite silhouetted for miles. I felt like I was Moses on top of the world. After the sunset, all light disappeared and the top of Mount Sinai was blanketed in darkness. There was idle chit-chat before everyone went to sleep on their individual plot of limited dirt. The wind began to pick up. The temperature began to drop. And there was nowhere to hide or take shelter from the elements. I was not prepared for the next 8 hours. I pulled the hood of my rain poncho over my head and face and pulled its drawstring tight. It was no use. The wind howled up and down the mountains and through my meager protection. I lay on my back and looking at the stars, unable to fall asleep, shivering and praying to God that I would survive the night. I was freezing. My teeth chattered and my body shivered. Please, God, let this end. Please, God, let this end. Please, God, let the morning come. I must have finally passed out in the wee hours of the morning and survived the night, because at 5 a.m. I was awoken by people talking in various foreign languages and stepping on top of me. I found out that the tourist buses drop their guests off at the base of Mount Sinai at 2 in the morning so that they can climb the mountain with flashlights in the dark and catch the sunrise at 5:30. Hundreds of tourists packed the small summit of Mount Sinai like riders on a subway car, waiting for a glimmer of light. And then, in the bitter cold morning, the most beautiful sunrise on earth appeared on the horizon. Reds and oranges and pinks flooded the sky as the sun came up over the eastern mountains. For 10 minutes, the crowd oohed and awed, and cameras snapped as they captured the fiery panorama. Then something magical happened. The early morning tourists vanished as quickly as they had appeared, and only the dozen that had stayed overnight were left to breathe in the beauty and the tranquility. We ultimately descended the mountain, gathered our belongings at the monastery, and boarded the next bus heading east to Israel. Several hours later, we reached the Israeli border. We exited the bus at Taba, Egypt, and walked across the Egypt-Israeli border at Eilat, where I kneeled, kissed the ground, and recited the Shema. The warmth of Israel heated my entire being and thawed the previous night's chill. I was home at last.
Hi. The year was 1997, and I had just been forced to go on dialysis with end-stage polycystic kidney disease, and I did not do well on dialysis. If I'd had to stay on another year, I don't think I'd have survived. So I put out word to everyone I knew that I would soon need a transplant, and then I waited to see how people would respond. At KI, did they ever? Rabbi Reuben and his ever so lovely wife Dee Dee each offered one of their kidneys. So did Cantor Chaim. Dee Dee was so enthusiastic about donating to me that twice over the next few months she sent copies of her own blood test results just so I could see what a fantastic pair of kidneys she's got. Their support and similar offers from a dozen others meant the world to me, especially in my extremely weakened condition. Those offers still stagger me, even now, and I still have no idea what I did to deserve that kind of outpouring. So I figured I just had to keep living the way I always had. Anyhow, eventually I accepted a kidney from a young Israeli cousin. Her name is Tammy, and our joint consecutive surgeries were scheduled for a few months later. During that time, the docs asked me to get a few other people to donate blood, just in case it was needed during the operations. If neither Tammy or I needed it, the blood would go to the UCLA blood bank. Dee Dee and Chaim again volunteered, and they hustled over to UCLA to donate. But Dee Dee was ruled out, ineligible on a technicality. Steve quickly stepped up right away, and he said, "Here, take mine." Later, our old friend and fellow congregant Bob Scheibel also donated a pint of blood. Not what you expect from a lawyer. After the transplant, there was more remarkable kindness, this time completely unsolicited. About 3 weeks after my transplant, just after noon on a Saturday, I was running a very high fever and feeling terrible. That can be a sign of rejection. So we were pretty worried. Marilyn was about to take me to UCLA emergency. In that pre-smartphone era, the phone rang. It literally did ring, just as we were on our way out the door. It was Dee Dee checking up on me. I told her what was happening, and then we left, and we thought no more about the call. I checked into the emergency room, and here's a small aside. Seeing Marilyn come in with me, the clerk said, "I see you brought your daughter, Mr. Elias." And that cheered up Marilyn a little bit that day. Anyway, they took my blood. They stashed us in a little examining room, and they announced we would have to wait 3 hours to see what was up. We had just sat down when there was a knock on the door. It was Steve and Dee Dee. They had driven right over there. Between them, and you have to remember, Dee Dee is a stand-up comic, and she can do it anytime, any place. Between them, they kept us in figurative stitches, laughing for the whole 3 hours, which is a long time, before the word came that this was not rejection, but only a virus common in new organ transplants. So the bottom line here is we have some of the most generous, caring people at KI that Marilyn and I have found anywhere. Something to treasure.
Hello. My father, Hassan Mordechai Max Furmansky Levasholom, was a Holocaust survivor from Sejny, Poland. He lost all his family except for one uncle when he was just a teenager. After the Shoah, he became a renowned Hassan, Yiddish opera singer, Hebrew school director, and much more. From Poland, he went to Austria and Europe to study, traveled to Argentina, where he met my mother, a Jewish third-generation Argentinian from Russia, and years later we moved to the U.S., my parents, my sister, 2 brothers, and myself. His dream was to live and die in Israel. So he, my mom, and sister moved there a few decades ago. My father went back to Poland after 60 years. He was the only Jew to ever go back to his town. He found his house and his temple, which had been converted first into a Nazi headquarters, then into the town's fire department, and eventually into a Yiddish theater, where non-Jewish young people also started a klezmer band. At a town meeting with this youth, my father asked them, "So, are you better off now without the Jews?" No one answered. But the proof was how this town came together to keep a Jewish memory alive. He went back many times with our family, with most expenses paid. And every time, the welcome was larger and more elaborate. Even bands and delegates were welcoming him at the train station. I never went. I felt I had been there before, and I wasn't going back, especially after hearing so many sad stories from him as a young child. My father passed away last year at 90 years old. The last time I saw him in person was for his 90th birthday. I was not there for his funeral. I went for his shloshing, meaning 30 days after he was laid to rest. My mother wanted all of us to say a few words at his gravesite. I didn't know what I was going to say, but in the middle of the night I woke up, and not being able to go back to sleep, I decided to write what was on my mind, and this is what I wrote. The title of my poem is Hineni, I Am Here. I wasn't there at his funeral or at the end of his life, but I was there now. Hineni, I am here. I am here, Papi, to pay homage to the wonderful life you led. You rose from the ashes of the Holocaust to a life of joy and service through your song. To everyone, you've been an inspiration of survival, perseverance, and strength. To me, you're just my father, and I'm your daughter, the one who danced on the tip of your shoes as a young child, and later as a young girl danced the polka with you around joyous floors. To everyone, you were the teacher, the mentor, the voice of gold. To me, you're just my father, and I'm your daughter, the one who likes to quote your quotes and cherish the Yiddish shtetl stories that are so relevant still today. To everyone, you're the impeccable dresser, gentleman, husband, father, seide, and great-grandfather. To me, you're just my father, and I'm your daughter, the one who spreads the joy as you spread your song, wisdom, and teachings. To everyone, you're a beacon of light in a world that can get so very dark. To me, you're just my father, and I'm your daughter, and you've done well. Hineni, I am here.
I would like to dedicate this story to 3 teenagers from the KI congregation: Spencer Green, Max Kaller, and Bryce Terman. In the year 2010, I had a doubleheader of epic proportions one day during my KI family trip to Israel. A guided tour of Yad Vashem in the morning, followed by 3 bar mitzvahs of boys from the KI congregation outside the walls of Jerusalem in the afternoon. The day's events represented a circle of life, except in reverse order. Death of human life, intellect, and potential at Yad Vashem in the morning, and a celebration of the lives of 3 young boys as they ascended into manhood in the afternoon. A contrast of life predicaments separated by 70 years. Both events filled with incredible memories, one filled with death that we can never forget, and one filled with life that we can never allow to be taken away from us. Our KI triple bar mitzvah service began overlooking the city of Jerusalem outside the walls of the old city. A peaceful atmosphere existed on this special day as it was the Shabbat. A lack of cars on the surrounding roads had created an ominous sound of silence that was pleasantly interrupted only by the melodic sounds of our cantor, Chaim Frankel, leading us in song as the Torah unveiled in preparation for the 3 bar mitzvah services that were about to commence with 30 KI families in attendance. During this peace-filled moment, outside the walls of the old city, our world was literally rocked. Suddenly, and without any warning, we were being stoned by Arabs who were tossing baseball-sized rocks over the wall of the old city of Jerusalem directly upon us. As you can imagine, the rocks that rained down from above the walls caused immediate chaos as all the KI families sought cover, trying to protect ourselves and our children. Some of us were hit and were bleeding. Little did we know that our experience was truly a metaphor for the country of Israel, a land inhabited by Jews
seeking nothing more than peace, but surrounded by enemies, seeking our destruction at every opportunity. As we sought refuge along the wall, we were forced to make the decision that would affect every one of the KI congregants that were present in Jerusalem on that day. Should we leave or should we stay? Should we leave this hostile environment where our lives are being threatened for the simple reason that we were Jews? On the other hand, how could we jeopardize our children's lives and continue the 3 bar mitzvah services with no protection from the evil that was being rained down upon us from above? We made our decision. We decided to stay and stand our ground and continue our 3 bar mitzvah services in defiance of the rocks that had been thrown down upon us by our enemies. Why? Because we felt an obligation to past generations of Jews to stand our ground and tell our enemies emphatically, we are Jews, and we will stand up to those who try to take away our right to express our Jewish beliefs. We moved to a safer place along Jerusalem's external wall and continued our bar mitzvah service until its rightful conclusion, in an incredible display of strength and unity from all of the KI community members who were present on that day in the year 2010. It was one of my proudest days to be a Jew. The contrast between the afternoon bar mitzvah services and the morning at Yad Vashem was overwhelming. One was a story about the elimination of youth, the elimination of potential, the elimination of hope. The other is a story about the blossoming of youth in a world with unlimited potential, a story about the present and the future. Showing the world that we will not be eliminated no matter how hard the Babylonians, the Romans, the Germans, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Arabs have tried, we learned on this day that we will not only survive, but we will overcome the obstacles that our enemies have put in the way of the Jews. I was reassured by the way that the 30 KI families stood up and said in unison, through our actions, that we will do what is necessary to make the world a better place for our sons and our daughters, as well as our Jewish brethren around the world. I have a favorite photograph from my trip to Israel in 2010. It is sunset at the Western Wall, later in the day, after the conclusion of our bar mitzvah service. The sun is glowing off the Dome of the Rock in the background. I am standing with my arms around my 2 daughters, surrounded by thousands of Jews from around the world who are here to visit the Promised Land. I strongly believe that the destiny of my daughters and the Jewish people will be determined by what happens in this small plot of land in the Middle East that we lovingly call Israel, whose Jewish soul extends from the Golan Heights in the north to Eilat in the south, and whose Jewish heart resides steadfastly in Jerusalem. I conclude my story with a phase from the Bar Mitzvah prayer book, which I have in my hand, which we used on that memorable day in Jerusalem, 2010. May Israel continue to be the temple that magnetizes the loving eyes of Jews in all corners of the world. Long live the Jewish people. Shalom.
During the late 1940s and 1950s in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Oh. Okay. Got it. Thank you. I'll start again. During the late 1940s and 1950s in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the life of our family revolved around the Jewish community and our synagogue, a Dath Yeshurun congregation of about 850 families. At that time, there were many firsts in the conservative movement that were either begun at a Dath or embraced by our congregation. In 1951, our Rabbi Morris Gordon participated in the first ever meeting of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Fellowship Conference, the emphasis then being on a refocus from the problems of European Jewry and Zionism to religious and cultural growth, spirituality, and ethical issues. The new Reconstructionist rabbis were dedicating themselves to the task of rebuilding American Jewish life, Jewish spiritual values, and the importance of developing a strong and genuine American Jewish community. Also in 1951, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan came to our synagogue, and he spoke there, which inspired the transition to Reconstructionist philosophy at our congregation during the 50s and early 60s. As an aside, I later learned that my aunt and uncle, Molly and Julius Fliegelman of Los Angeles, were among the early supporters of Rabbi Kaplan. As a teen during the 50s, the ideas of Reconstructionism spoke to me and enabled me to begin to create a positive personal Jewish approach to life. With the leadership of our new rabbi, Stanley Rabinowitz, our congregation was becoming inclusive and egalitarian. I had always wondered and asked, why not me, or us, or girls, or women? We were never able to participate in Saturday Shabbat services or learn to read from the Torah because traditionally women weren't allowed to participate as equals, or actually not allowed to participate at all. As teens, we were all involved in organizations such as BBYO, AZA, USY. USY, the youth group of the conservative movement, was founded in the basement of our synagogue in 1948. Boys and girls of bar and bat mitzvah age were required to attend Saturday morning Shabbat services for at least 2 years prior to their individual bar or bat mitzvah ceremonies. Of course, bar mitzvahs were held on Saturday mornings, and bat mitzvahs, finally added for girls, took place on Friday nights when the Torah wasn't even read. 1954 was a momentous year. Dath Yeshurun now mostly had become an egalitarian congregation. Women counted as part of the minyan and were invited to serve on the board of directors of the congregation. However, women reading from the Torah was still considered too radical a departure from tradition. And then, an exciting event occurred. For the first time in the history of our congregation, there was a bat mitzvah on Saturday morning. This was later noted in a book entitled Jews in Minnesota. I also heard that this was an event that occurred over the entire upper Midwest, the first event of this type. A big deal was made of it by members of our congregation because a woman, a girl, actually held the Torah and participated in a Saturday morning service. But note, I said, held the Torah, not read from the Torah. As teens, we girls regularly did participate in Friday night services, leading some readings and some music. But this was a bat mitzvah on Saturday morning, and it was mine. Wait. Thank you. On Saturday morning, April 10th, 1954, during a Dath Yeshurun's 70th anniversary year, Linda Grossman, me, daughter of Maurice and Marjorie Grossman, became a bat mitzvah. Looking back, it must have been a big deal. I don't remember thinking so at the time. For some reason, I think I expected this to happen. After all, our congregation was embracing Reconstructionist practices. Our rabbi was very supportive of the egalitarian point of view. And my father was president of the synagogue. I pause at this moment because after speaking to my sister this morning on the phone, we remembered that today, March 6th, is my father's birthday. He would be 106 and probably very proud of me for saying this, whether he would be able to hear it or not. But it wasn't long after my bat mitzvah that women were called to read the Torah at Adath. And now, many years later, the event is still remembered and documented and pictured in a book called 125 Years of Adath Yeshurun Congregation from Generation to Generation. And I am very proud to have been that first woman, that first girl. From the time of my bat mitzvah through our high school years, Reconstructionism was infused into our conservative congregation's education and religious practice. For me, it continues to inspire and guide my personal journey. And now, when I read from the Torah on Rosh Hashanah, or witness a young girl reading from the Torah during her Saturday morning bat mitzvah, I think back to my own bat mitzvah all those many years ago, to my bat mitzvah, the first step.
Dad's smile. I'm at the beach. I came down to have time to think about Dad. This is the month of his yahrzeit. He had chosen to be cremated and his ashes placed in the ocean. And so his ashes are out there somewhere, probably by now everywhere. I wonder where in this turbulent sea that not quite proud smile is floating, if it stayed intact. It wasn't his everyday smile. This was the one we saw. When we knew he had said or done something unusual, especially if it had tickled Mom. Something he had conjured up from that part of him that was so unpredictable, so off-kilter, so ironic, and so funny. Something from that part of him that persevered even through his last years as he struggled with debilitating illness. The smile he managed to give me that afternoon, he and I went to the bris of Justin, my childhood friend, Maury's first son. It was 1985, a sunny summer West Los Angeles afternoon. After we arrived, we stood in the entryway for a while. We were waiting patiently as people greeted each other before moving further into the house. It was warm in the house, and as people kept filing in, the rooms were getting stuffy. There weren't many people there that Dad knew. It was mostly Maury's clients and business associates. A few of my friends who Dad had known were there, but they were scattered around the various rooms, and he wasn't up to exploring. The bris was called for 1 o'clock, and about 25 minutes before it was to begin, I checked out the room in which it was to be held. I wanted Dad to be seated somewhere near a door in case he became too tired or uncomfortable during the service. There were about 50 or 60 folding chairs set up in rows facing the large upholstered chair where the circumcision was to be performed. A few people were seated, but Dad didn't want to sit and wait, so we went to the dining room and visited with two old friends of mine who had spent a lot of time at our house over the years. The mohel arrived, and people quickly went to the living room and found seats, and by the time we returned, the only seats remaining were along the rear wall, and the doorway was halfway across the room from those vacant seats. Knowing he couldn't stand for the entire ceremony, we walked to the rear, and Dad found a vacant chair in the middle of that last row. I left him and stood in the doorway where I could see both him on my right and on my left the chair where the ceremony was taking place. The baby, Justin, swaddled tightly in his blanket, was brought in by his mom and was handed over to Maury's brother-in-law, Seymour Schwartz. Seymour was the special person, the sandek. He is the one honored by being chosen to hold the baby during the circumcision. Seymour was close to my dad's age, and Dad knew him through having attended many of the same charity events over the years. Dad used to describe him as somebody who, quote, pissed ice water. I'm not sure how he formed that opinion, but I heard it more than a few times over the years. He said he was, quote, a big mocker at charity events, but he was one cold son of a bitch. So there I was, standing in the doorway on the side of the room, halfway between Dad and where the ceremony was going to take place. And the room was packed, and Dad, who had seemed to shrivel during the last 2 years, was no longer visible behind the rows of people seated between us. Most of the men were wearing yarmulkes, many were in suits, and the women were dressed in pantsuits. Justin and Seymour were no longer visible. They were hidden behind the bulky black form of the Moyles' back. The small kiddish cup with the wine was pretty much all I could see. The prayers were chanted, and the circumcision was marked by the baby's cry, which was followed quickly by Seymour's hand reaching out and dipping into the wine in the kiddish cup and then disappearing behind the ominous shape of the moil. Justin stopped crying as he sucked on a wine-soaked piece of cotton that Seymour had given him. As the service dragged on, the room had gotten considerably warmer. People were shifting in the wooden slatted chairs, and all I could think about, actually all I had thought about during the whole ceremony, was Dad. He was squished in the back row, seated among people he didn't know, attending a ceremony he couldn't even see, in a room that was well now over 80 degrees. At last, with one final prayer, the service ended. People got to their feet and began exiting the room. I started moving upstream to get to Dad, excusing myself with every step and with each turn of my body as I attempted to squeeze by yet another person who was anxious to get out of the room. Finally, I got to the back row. The people nearest the aisle were standing, waiting for the row in front of them to move forward toward the door, and I saw Dad. He was still sitting. His head was slightly bowed. His face had no expression. I couldn't tell what he was thinking or feeling. The people to his left finally started to move. With some effort, he pulled himself to his feet using the back of the chair in front of him. I waited for him as he moved slowly towards me, and when we were together, I asked, Dad, how are you? He didn't answer, and I saw no acknowledgement that he even heard me. I didn't say anything, and we continued moving slowly toward the door. By this time, the room had pretty much emptied. Some of the small booklets that were a guide to the service were lying on chairs. Others were on the carpet, and the kiddish cup was still next to the now empty chair in the front of the room. The sun had reached across the room and fell on Dad's face. His complexion had grayed considerably during the past year, and his skin was drawn unnaturally tight across his bony structure of his face. As he walked, his left hand moved along the wall, not so much to steady himself, but seemingly as a guide or reminder to the structure of the room. I looked again at Dad and asked a little louder, Dad, how are you feeling? And still facing down, he said, you know, I learned something today. I said, really? I said, what is it? Now he turned only a little, and half facing the floor, his eyes peered sideways up toward me. He said earnestly and in his best deadpan, I learned that if Seymour Schwartz asked you to sit in his lap, don't do it. And with that, he gave me for quite possibly the last time that smile, the one that had come from that part of him and that had amused, confounded, and enriched our lives for so many years.
What's in a name? We called him Dr. What's-It, Dr. Whatchamacallit, Dr. Wetcherpants. We called him names to escape the reality of who he really was, the new boyfriend, the interloper, the replacement father. Although we had known him as our mother's business partner, the cantor in our congregation, the psychiatrist whose family home we had dined at for Passover, this new definition was somehow left undefined in our own lives. What is the legacy of divorce? If you asked me when I was a 12-year-old girl, I would have told you it's the story of parents who calmly informed me they had something to tell us after dinner. My stoic parents bitterly chewed in silence while staring into the space behind each other's head. Refusing to eat, I lay on the couch, tears streaming behind my head of the silk pillows, knowing that my brother and I were about to become sacrificial lambs at the ceremony of their selfishness. The shadow figure of divorce had been skulking around my house for months, while everyone ignored its presence, pretending to greet each day as the day before. except that it wasn't. I remember staring at the white bedroom door of my mother, who was often closeted behind it. I remember the weight of the couch, the curve and warmth of my father's round belly as I rested on it, the way his fingers curled themselves around the strands of my bark-colored hair, while we watched his favorite programs like Gunsmoke and The Wild Wild West on TV. I remember the silence, the shuffling sounds of feet on the green shag carpet, the way my parents passed each other, strangers in the hallway. But most of all, I remember the divorce dessert they served us, informing my brother and I that they didn't love each other anymore, that they were separating. I ran from the house, barefoot and breathless, across the cold grass to the safety of my best friend's ranch-style home, where normal people were laughing together over dinner, the tinkling sounds of it bubbling around my head. I tried to ignore the doorbell and the worried way Christy's mother stared at me, doe-eyed, across the room. I held on to the table, wedging myself into place, while my mother explained to her what was happening. Very soon, closets and drawers were emptied, the cigar smell was perfumed away from the curtains and carpet, and the pancake mix for Sunday fun-day breakfast that my father always cooked sat untouched in the pantry. Although the house still sat squarely facing the street, the school bus continued to hover at the corner waiting for me. The meals got prepared by our babysitter, and the minutes of time continued to tick by. Every day after that moment careened me like a pinball inside of a machine, spinning me from one extreme to the next. I ricocheted across emotions I couldn't control, and it changed me forever. Soon, and without much explanation, the good doctor was there when we woke up in the morning and when we went to sleep at night. But the white door to my mother's bedroom still continued to remain closed very often. One day I forced my way in. "Why are your clothes in my father's closet?" I demanded to this new boyfriend reclining on his change lounge, and his halting reply, "Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time," sent me into paroxysms of breathlessness that required heaving into a bag to fill my lungs with the wind that had just been knocked out of it. I stumbled back to my own bedroom and closed my door against both of them. Months passed, and the deadline of my bat mitzvah loomed, but I was unprepared, failing to learn the Hebrew and fearing the eyes of the community on my newly fractured family. One day, as I tried to remain a focused interest on the squiggly letters squirming across the page, Dr. Whatsit came and sat down beside me. And I edged away. Softly, with a measured voice, he said, "You don't have to like me." Well, he really didn't need to worry about that. "But you do need to learn your Parsha, and I can help you." I leveled my gaze at him, fully seeing him for the first time since he'd insinuated himself into our life. Feeling desperate, but without nudging my chair any further, I pushed the book in between the space of our bodies. Each week, the air between us became less weighted with recriminations, anger, and loss. Musical notes now hung in the air, lifting us both up as our voice joined in harmony. He told me stories of his own difficult childhood, of his bar mitzvah, of finding God, of traveling to Israel. He told me about his regrets and his hopes for our new extended family. I was able to understand him and then to see myself and who I was becoming, and for the first time in months, I was able to view myself not from a distance, but from inside my own body. Standing on the bima at Shar HaShalom Synagogue in Clear Lake City, Texas, I stared out at the congregation in my white Annie Hall suit and my Dorothy Hamill haircut, my father, his girlfriend, my mother, and my stepfather-to-be by my side, as I confidently led the Friday night and Saturday morning service with our female rabbi. I cemented my newly adult status by cartwheeling across the concrete in front of the temple and demanding that we go go-karting for the afternoon. It was January 20th, 1976. My mother remained my mother, but this man who we had once hated and blamed for breaking what we later learned was an already long broken marriage had become my teacher, my confidant, my extra parent. When I married and had children, they were gifted with a set of 4 doting grandparents and a great-grandmother, as my husband's parents had died long before. There were vacations to Texas, to Colorado, to Florida. There was a long line of people to pass down the Torah at my children's bar and bat mitzvahs, and more love than I could have ever expected on that very dismal night of so many years ago. So, if you ask me today, what is the legacy of divorce? I can tell you. My father gave me life. He gave me a Jewish name and history. And Dr. Whatchamacallit? This man who was born in Siberia and spent the first 3 years of his life in a Russian labor camp, this man who grew up Orthodox in Brooklyn over a deli, who put himself through medical school to become a psychiatrist, a gabbai, a cantor, an author, an actor, who played Tevye in our community theater and sang If I Were a Rich Man so often around the house that I would hear it in my sleep. This man who has been married happily to my mother for more than 40 years, this man, Dr. Kenneth Wetcher, gave me a spiritual legacy that I am now passing down. He became and is still today my dad. My children's 80, and we are all family.
My Zadie lived with us in my parents' home. He used to laugh and put me on his knee.
And he spoke about his life in Poland.
He spoke with a bitter memory. My Bubby loved us all, each one a diamond.
Her white hair framed her face, her wrinkled brow.
The dishes that she cooked for us, I smell them now. I'm so thankful she taught me how.
But Zadie made us laugh.
With
Bobby we would sing, and Zadie led the kiddies Friday night.
My
Bobby and my Zadie, how I love them so. They blessed me when they taught me wrong from right.
Zadie's eyes lit up when he would teach me Torah. He taught me every line so carefully.
Bobby spoke about our slavery in Egypt.
And how God did us to make us free.
But Zadie made us laugh. With Bobby we would sing, and Zadie led the kiddies Friday night. Bobby and my Zadie, how I love them so. They blessed us when they taught us wrong from right.
Many winters went by, and many summers come along. And now my children sit in front of me.
And who will be the teacher of our children? Who will be their Zadie if not for me? Who will be the Bobbies of our children? Who will be their teachers if not we? live within us. Their blessings live within us. Burning bright.
A picture within a picture. Behind my story is my mother's story, because hers is where mine began. 100 years ago, my mother was born in Skyttle, Poland. She was the youngest of 9 children, 2 boys who had died and 7 surviving girls. Her family was very poor. She lived in a hut her father built. There was little food. Her father also built a connecting hut for his eldest daughter, Bluma, her husband, and their 6 children. The family was able to leave Poland a few at a time and go to America. My mother did not see her father for 10 years, nor her mother for 6 years. She was continually feeling abandoned and frightened. The last to leave were my mother and her 2 older sisters when they were teenagers. It was 1932. Only Bluma, her husband, and their 6 children were unable to get out. They said, "Don't worry, we'll be fine." There was correspondence between Bluma and the family in America. My mother sent them a professionally photographed picture of herself. By her appearance, they must have thought she'd become a movie star. To them, the style and luxurious fabric of her dress and the money paid for it showed a successful life beyond their wildest imaginations. In Skyttle, a picture was taken. There was Bluma, her husband Yitzhak, my cousins Hannah, Lipa Rochel, Elka, Moshe, Avromel, and Yocheved, the youngest, who sat and held the framed photo of my mother. By the late 1930s, the letters from Bluma and her family stopped coming. Once again, my mother felt abandoned, this time by her sister who had taken care of her in her own mother's absence. It was after I was born here in America some years later that my mother's story became my story. Her pain became my pain. The bedtime stories my mother told me were not Disney-like. There was a story of how her father built furniture with hiding places in them for her and her sisters so they would not be found by the Polish soldiers. If they came into her home, my grandmother told them in perfect Polish that all her sons were fighting in the glorious Polish army. She would then invite them to sit down and eat whatever food she had prepared for her family, while my mother and her sisters listened from their hiding places as the soldiers ate. As my mother said, a man with a full stomach was less likely to be hungry for anything else. There were times when my mother, at the age of 5 or 6, was left alone at night in her home because she was too young to go out with her sisters when they went scavenging for discarded potatoes on the surrounding farms. She described how she stood by the window, calling out into the darkness, "Are you there? Are you there?" And her sisters called back, "Yes, we're here." In the late 1990s, my mother received a letter from the American Red Cross stating that Bluma's husband died in Auschwitz. My mother never fully recovered, but she continued her hunt for a clue to what happened to the others. After she died, I picked up the hunt. No one else has been found. I've been told they were probably among those whose names were never recorded. Although my mother was never in the Holocaust, it affected her for her whole life. She was fearful of leaving the house, fearful of letting her children go, and suspicious of everyone. Not only was that world dangerous, it was evil. I too grew up frightened to leave the house. As a child, I hid birthday card invitations. I was school phobic. I couldn't leave my mother's side. Finally, in 1980, I found the courage to do what I had been afraid to do all my life. No more of this hand-me-down pain. I wanted to be part of this world that seemed so alien. I fought. And as I fought, I started looking and feeling as if I were dying in a concentration camp. I lost 30 pounds from an already thin frame. But I had to let my mother's suffering go. With time, I got better. I turned myself inside out. It took 20 years. The chain was finally broken. Although my mother passed down a legacy of pain and fear, she also gave me the legacy of Judaism. Being the youngest of 7 girls and no living boys, my mother said, "You can imagine how thrilled my father was when I was born." As she grew, her parents shaved her head, sent her to Cheder, the Jewish elementary school, told her to sit in the back of the classroom and say nothing. She was basically raised as a boy. Her father told his male friends that she would be his Kaddish, the prayer traditionally only recited by men for the dead. And she was his Kaddish. She became fluent in Hebrew after studying it in Poland and then in America. In Los Angeles, she prepared over 2,000 adults for their B'nai Mitzvah. She became an icon. I started Hebrew school at age 6, where I also was usually the only girl in the class. I remember my bat mitzvah. Right before I went up to the pulpit, I went blank. My mother gently took me aside and quietly chanted the Hebrew from my Haftarah Parsha. I was able to get up on the pulpit and continue. How many mothers could do that then or now? I am standing here before you today because of my mother's Jewish legacy. I can't imagine being anything but a Jew. I was once asked by a Christian if I missed having a Christmas tree with all the festivities. I said, no, I have my own identity. I miss nothing. Right here and now, I feel my mother's presence. Temple was always my mother's second home. In one way, my ending was changed. For me, there will be no more suffering. In another way, my life is enriched. I was given a Jewish soul. Behind my story is both of my mother's stories, because hers is where mine began.
Hanukkah by the book. We had a tradition when I was growing up that we would get a present each night of Hanukkah. My mother would ask us if we wanted a big, small, or medium present. Nothing was extravagant, just enough giving to last 8 nights like the oil that spawned the holiday. So one night, I think I was 7, after we'd lit the candles, I asked for a medium-sized gift. I remember unwrapping my flattish package and turning it over to see that it was a book. I quickly announced with childish agony, "This isn't a present, it's a book." Oh, what had I done? After I was informed that my response was both ungracious and rude, I was sent to my room for the remainder of the evening. I think there was probably a lot of yelling involved as well. What thoughts must have gone through my parents' minds that night? Oy vey, Naomi, we're raising an illiterate. My father must have said to my mother, "We take her to bookstores. We have over 7,000 volumes of every genre in our home. We read every night after dinner. We read her Eloise, and she read Winnie the Pooh to us. She can read. What does this mean? I don't think my mother could have consoled him. It was a tragedy in the making. In my room, I ruminated. What had I done? Was it really so wrong? I didn't like reading. I liked playing and swimming and Barbies and making up stories with my friends, and I didn't like to read. I didn't even like it that all my family wanted to do was sit around and read. It made me crazy that my older sister would sit in the brown chair right in front of the TV and read and not watch. I couldn't talk to her about what Dr. Kildare had just done to his patient. I mean, she didn't even realize that Yvette Miu might die if she had an epileptic seizure while she was surfing. As Mom always did, after sending me to my room, she eventually came in to talk to me. I wasn't too open to the conversation. She calmly explained that even if I hadn't liked the present, I should have thanked them anyway. To reject it so instantly was the zenith of impoliteness. Why don't we read it together, she suggested, and then you can decide if you like it or not. I recall not agreeing, but obviously I heard her. Well, here we are so many years later, and I've come to terms with it all. I finally read Mr. Popper's Penguins. I realize that many of you will be ashamed to think that I wouldn't have liked that particular classic. But I did read it when my older daughter was in a production of it at Pali Elementary. It was cute. The play and the book. And what do I find now in my youngest daughter? Lean in, I'm going to whisper. She doesn't like to read. You know what? That's okay. It kills a little bit, but what can you do? You can't force someone to like what they don't like when they don't like it. Eventually, I learned to love reading. It started with a love of biographies, probably because I'm so nosy, and that evolved into historical fiction, drama, and the rest. I still like making up stories, and I scratch out a small pittance by writing my stories down. Who'd have thunk a book hater could become a book writer? And so it might be with my daughter. I still buy her books for Hanukkah, for her birthday, and I expect her to be polite even if she has no plans to read them. I don't have 7,000 volumes in my house, but I have a lot. And one of them is the 52-year-old copy of Mr. Popper's Penguins. A family tradition is intact, if on its own schedule. Thank you.
My story begins a long time ago in Shpykov, a little town located in the middle of Ukraine in Russia. The year was 1858. Shpykov was a small Jewish town, a typical Eastern European shtetl with maybe 100 Jewish families. Two of those families were the Schneiders and Esterlitzes, who lived next door to each other. They were not only neighbors, but they were very close friends. The two women, coincidentally, became pregnant at the same time. And as luck would have it, went into labor the same day. The problem was that they had hired the same midwife. And you have to picture this. The midwife is running back and forth between the two homes. The women are crying and shouting for her because each thinks they're going to deliver immediately. The midwife is shouting instructions to other family members. Complete chaos. But everything worked out fine. Two healthy babies were born within minutes of each other. A boy and a girl, Joseph Schneider and Sarah Esterlitz. Sometimes later, after the birth episode calmed down, the mothers are sitting quietly, quelling over their infants, and they started talking about the birth, the craziness, and how the children were born at the same time. And they said, you know, they're a perfect match. The mothers agreed on the spot that their children would marry when they grew up. And so it was that Sarah and Joseph were married when they were teenagers. Sarah and Joseph were my great-grandparents. And I have no idea if this arranged marriage turned into a marriage of love, but they had 7 children, including my grandmother Anna. And I know nothing about my great-grandparents, as opposed to Laura. And that's why this story has so much meaning for me. Also, my middle name is Joseph, after my great-grandfather. My grandmother Anna, along with her siblings, immigrated to the United States at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, along with millions of other Jews who were escaping the pogroms. Anna married and had 4 children of her own, one of whom was my mother. But sadly, Anna's husband, my grandfather, died when he was young, leaving my grandmother to raise the 4 kids through the Great Depression. She never remarried, and she lived with my parents the rest of her life, helping raise my younger brother and me. And it was only as an adult that I realized how lucky I was to have a live-in grandmother, acting as a second mother in my life. In fact, I recommend a live-in grandmother for all children. My most vivid memory of my grandmother is one of the things was she went off to her, what she called her Shpikov group. Somehow she had found a group of Jews in Los Angeles who had come from the little town of Shpikov, and they met regularly. But my most vivid memory of her is in the kitchen, cooking up her great dishes. My favorite was chopped liver. Never a written recipe. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. And one day when I was 9 or 10 years old, watching her do her magic in the kitchen, I started asking her questions about Shpikov. I said, "Where is Shpikov?" She said, "It's a little town in Russia where I was born." I said, "I know that." "Where in Russia?" I was so irritating with the questions. She says, "I don't know. Near Kiev." So I run to my atlas, World Atlas, look up for Kiev. There it is, the capital of Ukraine, but I can't find little Shpikov. I run back to her and say, "Grandma, I can't find Shpikov. How far is Shpikov from Kiev?" She says, "About 10 kopecks." She's giving me the cost of a train ride when she was a young girl, not the distance. So I gave up. Of course, today with Google Maps, you can immediately find Shpikov. It's 180 miles from Kiev. And they tell you it's a 4-hour drive without traffic in case you want to make that trip. So the next time my grandmother comes back from her Shpikov group, I started with my questions. I said, "What do you do in your group?" She says, "We eat, of course, and we tell stories." I said, "Well, what stories?" And then she tells me the story of her parents and how they were born simultaneously and how their marriage was agreed to right at birth. And every time she told me that story, she embellished and added details, which made the story very interesting to me. My grandmother passed away in 1980 at age 95, and I think she would be very pleased that I shared her story with you this afternoon.
I will remember you. Will you remember me? L'adore, vador, l'adore, vador, l'adore, vador, l'agid God lecha, ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, Kedushat Chanakdish Lador Vador Lador Vador Lador Vador Lagid God Leha Ula Netza Netzachim Ula Netza Netzachim Kedushat Chanakdish. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memory. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memory. V'shichacha Eloheinu v'nihinu yumush le'olam va'ed ke'melech gadol ke'melech gadol Kadosh Atah. I will remember you. Lador Vador, Lador Vador. Will you remember me? Lador Vador, Lador Vador. Let your life pass you by. Ula Netzach Netzachim. Weep not for the memory. Weep not for the memories.
So Laura, Judy, and myself want to thank you for coming to what we hope will be a regular part of the KI legacy. We have over 1,000 families here, and you can imagine how many stories. This is just a very, very small taste of stories, and I'm sure all of you have them as well.
We want to thank so much Fontana for putting our program together and helping us with everything. And we'd also like to thank Justin for our sound and all our lights. And our piano player, Charlie. And Chaim.
And we'd like to invite our cantor Chaim Frankel down for the last word, of course.
And then we're going to invite our cast to come back up so you can show your appreciation to them as well.
Actually, what I'm just going to do, if you will, I'm going to ask Laura Diamond to stand at your place, and please reserve your applause. Robert Bennon, Tom Elias, Alicia Albeck, John Bennon, Linda Scheibel, Richard Willis, Karen Rappaport McHugh, Audrey Greenberg, Judy Silk, and who knew he had such a great sense of humor, Sheldon Wells. Let's hear it for them.
Who knew?
Let us also please remain standing because Nancy Handler and Daniel Leance and Jonna Perricone and our wonderful pianist deserve the same round of applause. We're going to go out to have some dessert, a little nosh before dinner. And I just want to read a little something to you. A story. You can sit, sure. A story is not a stratagem for occasional use, a refuge to resort to now and then. It is rather like an established residence for the innermost self. All things have a home. The bird has a nest, the fox has a hole, the bee has a hive. A soul without a story is a soul without a home. What we experienced here today is we, the Jewish people story, these individuals who opened up their souls to us, have a very sacred home that we are all so blessed to be a part of. Truly one of the most moving experiences that I've experienced here today with all of you. And thank you for allowing us to witness and to view to look inside your souls, because that doesn't happen enough. So thank you, Karen and Judy and Laura, for creating such a remarkable experience for us. During our 65th year, it's not 125 years, Linda, of the shul in your hometown, although this is your hometown now. But 65 years, what a beautiful way a beautiful time to begin such an incredible program. So thank you all for coming, and let's go and greet and give a Yasher Koach to our wonderful people.
Not appropriate. Not appropriate.